Okay. Okay, thank you, Gail, and thank you, Gail and Chris, for supporting photography in Ynyshir as well, which is great. And I'm sure that Dan and I are absolutely beyond privileged to be able to sit with David and be part of a conversation with him. And welcome to everybody. We've kept out of the rain so far, which is great. So we'll talk amongst ourselves at first. We'll spend a bit of time discussing some of the things that we think are important about photographs and photography, or being photographers and communities. And then we'll open it up then for those of you who might like to ask some questions, probably of David, not so much of Dan and myself. But I'm sure that Dan and I would be happy to field questions as well. So to sort of start the conversation, I think it's worth just unpacking a little bit something about the kind of title that we had for today, which was Photographs, Photographers and Community, because one of the things which I believe that all three of us are really interested in are photographs, because ultimately that is the thing that we use to, through which to communicate ideas. Of course, photographers will each have their different way of making their pictures, making their photographs and communicating. And I think what is really interesting about putting us three in the same room together is that we kind of cover the same sort of patch of land in the way that we've photographed. David's gone a little bit further than us, Dan, I think, isn't he? He's sort of sure. got all over the world and done stuff. But as you can see from the fantastic work here, that David has also committed a huge part of his life to photographing in Wales. And of course, the thing that we're all doing, sometimes we do it more directly and sometimes less so, we are, of course, working with communities. And, you know, there are questions which we will all have and responses that we will all have in terms of the photographer and a community, because are we, given the right to photograph communities in the way that we want to? Is that fair? Are we taking something without giving it back? And there are all sorts of issues around photography. Anyway, I'm sure we'll start to talk about that, but I would like to start, if we may, to talk about one picture at a time. Let's take one at a time. And there's a photograph just on that wall at the top left-hand side, just below the 25-mile part of the captioning, and that's the one. And there's a picture that David took there in Aberavon, David, isn't it? And that was in the 1970s.
Early 70s.
Early 70s, forgive me. And I have to say, and I mentioned this to David before, David did a really incredible exhibition in the early 70s, which toured. It was shown in the museum, if I'm right, but it was also shown in Arles, in France, big festival, photography festival. And there was a poster that came from that festival, and I managed to get hold of it. And it was of that picture, and that picture always stayed on my wall in the office, particularly when I was in Cornwall, because it always reminded me that there was Wales. All these people huddled around this thing, you know, and it was just really great. So, David, when you took that picture, I know that you know there's a couple of things you're interested in. It's the idea that if you're going to photograph something, you want to be able to sell it, but also you want to photograph things that might soon disappear. So could you just perhaps tell us a little bit about the sort of ideas for that particular photograph? And if you can't see it, let's just say this. It's on Aberavon Beach. There's about 20, 30 people hidden behind wind shields and on a rather bleak, dark-looking day, and there's just one guy walking off with a surfboard. Yay, you know, that's so Where does that come from?
Well, if I go back, my home is Cardiff. I went to nursery school in Cardiff, etc. But at the beginning of the Second World War, my dad was stationed up in Scotland. So I guess at age of 6 or something, I went up to Scotland. And I didn't, for various reasons, didn't come back to Wales until 1970, by which time I was a photographer and of a certain kind of stature. What I wanted to do when I came back to Wales was to try to discover, I'm very interested in words of which I hear everybody using them, but my feeling is that they don't actually know what the meaning of the word is that they're using all the time. And one of those words is culture. So I come back to Wales and I'm continually hearing people saying, oh, this is my culture, you know. And so I would think, I wonder what they mean by that. You know, so I would ask them and then they would, most people would get very defensive and think you're attacking them when you're not. You're just asking them a very simple question. Well, what do they mean by the word culture? And I couldn't find from anybody a clear definition of what people actually meant. So I very purposely befriended somebody called Raymond Williams. Raymond Williams was a sociologist, I guess you'd call a sociologist, who'd written a quite definitive book called Culture. And so I spent quite some time with him. And in the end, I decided that what I was going to do I was going to spend 1/3 of my life photographing Wales. I had a rather pompous idea that if I started in the 70s, by the time I died, I could have the most definitive collection of pictures in Wales that anybody had ever had and ever likely to get. So that's a kind of rather pompous ambition. And so I divided Wales up into 3 parts, really. The way we live, the people that live, and the landscape. And so I started to work. And the 1/3 of the time that I had, I very deliberately didn't worry very much about making a living out of that 1/3, the pictures taken in Wales. I knew enough about Wales to know that if you put Wales into the title of a book, you don't sell the book. I mean, it's as simple as that. You sell it to a couple of people in Wales, but you sell 3 copies outside of Wales. That's very sad. It's not only Wales. Obviously, if you do a book on Luxembourg, you sell 3 books outside of Luxembourg. So I did it sort of as just something that I really enjoyed doing, that I could spend a lot of time. And since that time, I checked last night, I've shot 43,000 pictures in Wales. And then you edit those down. And what I'm trying to do is just, for myself, try to discover what I mean by the word culture. You know, what is it about Wales that for me makes it Wales? And it's as simple as that. So it's not the exotic, it's always the ordinary. And so I'm always after the ordinary. I'm particularly after the ordinary which I know is going to disappear. So I very often look at something and say to myself, do I think this is going to be here in 20 years' time? And if I know it's not, then it seems to me it's worth pulling my finger out and really working hard on trying to get the definitive picture of that thing. Because what happens is that it then becomes memory for people. And so the picture, this is a long thing, the picture of Aberafan Beach is, I just happened to hear that there was a street, a whole street in the valley somewhere, I forget where it was, where they all go by coach together and they go on holiday together. Everybody in the street goes down. And so I just went with them. It seemed to me a logical thing to do. And this particular picture, I think, is amusing because it shows the whole street determined to be together on this incredible sort of windy, cold day. And it just seemed to me very much pertinent to the time, etc. And I think it is, because you kind of don't see that anymore.
And there is that thing, I suppose, where certainly when I was growing up as a kid, we used to go on these tours, and sometimes it would be Barry Island, and I know you've got the similar things happening in Barry Island, and it was a community, and people didn't want to sort of split up, you know, they just wanted to keep together. But I think what was fascinating with that picture, the thing that sort of you know, photographs always seem easy to make, don't they? It's, or if you're looking at a photograph, you think, oh, well, I could do that, you know, that's easy. But no. You look at David's pictures, and there's always something, and you think, well, how did that happen? Why did that happen? And in that Aberavon picture, to see the street is one thing, but the guy walking off with the surfboard, it's like, you know, it's like counterculture, you know, there's something really interesting going on. So when you're standing in front of something, because you always seem to say there's only two things you've got to worry about in photography. It's where you stand and when you press the shutter.
Absolutely.
So when he was standing there in front of that group of people, how did you come to know that was going to be the best time?
Well, I didn't. I mean, what one does is you see something and you think, how can I project that in a picture? To me, photography is about pictures. So I don't want to produce pictures which need a lot of text to explain what they're about. I'm not against a text, but the minimum I like. So, you know, where a place is, the date, is about as much as I particularly want to put in a picture. So I want the picture to stand up a picture by which people look at it and for some reason like the picture. So when I get to somewhere like that, one of the first things I do is say, where is the key point to shoot the picture from? So I will find that point where I think it's giving you the most information. And then I'm very aware, through experience, that things happen in the background which have an enormous effect on the foreground. So in that particular case, it's obvious to me that the people in the little corral there at the front are not going to move. So if I stand there for an hour and keep shooting pictures, they will be the same. But what I also know is that if I stand there for an hour, things will happen in the background which will only happen for seconds. And so if you look at the contact sheets of those, you will see that I probably shot 20 pictures with different things vaguely happening in the background. And it's very difficult when you're actually there to know what you have. You get a feeling for what you have, and it seems right. But then by shooting this alternative, that alternative, this, you start to cut and get luck on your side, you know, and then suddenly, for some reason, it all stops, and you think you've got it, and then you go back and edit, and then from the number of pictures you have, let's say I shot 20 pictures then. I used to shoot a lot less then because film was very expensive. And then I would edit that particular picture. But I was obviously aware of the surfboard. But I have other pictures with other different people in the back. I love dogs. I'm always looking. Cartier-Bresson used to love dogs. It's amazing how many pictures, great Cartier-Bresson pictures, have a dog in. They help enormously with the design of the picture. So it is very conscious, in a way, shooting that way. You know, you're working at it, you're working at it, you're working at it. So very rarely do I spend less than half an hour with a picture.
Yeah, cause again, I think the different photographers work in different ways,
Yeah.
but I think there was something of a myth peddled at one point, perhaps 50 years ago, that photographers were these sort of geniuses that could sort of somehow just turn up and something would happen, and you know, in front of them, you know, they had this magic. But actually, it's not, is it? Not always. It's the hard work, isn't it?
It isn't for me, because I mean, one of the things that I never do is ask anybody to do anything, and I don't change anything in Photoshop or anything like that. So for me, it's very important. To me, it's almost the most important thing for the photographer I like, that what you see there happened in the world of its own accord, you know. And that to me is very important. But it's very difficult, because it's you know, half the time you keep thinking, oh, that person, if only they were moved, if they were a foot to the right or a foot to the left, the picture would be a better picture. But the answer is, wait and shoot another picture. A different picture if it's not there. So I personally, so if nothing else in my life, if you look at my pictures, you will know that it happened, you know. Yeah. But I don't know if that's... see, one of the problems is that styles and things change. As you'll see, I shoot all in black and white, you know. But somebody like Dan shoots you only in colour?
I shot black and white for many years,
yeah.
35mm, and of course you know when you're out and about, you know when there's potential for a photograph, so you can get prepared to kind of work the scene. I don't know if you must know what that. So there's always that feeling, oh, there's something's going to happen here, or there's, you know. So it's always, you know, as I shoot on film, so I'm never as trigger happy. So I like to think that when I've pressed that button a maximum of half a dozen times, I've got it in there. So it's important to kind of anticipate what's happening slightly ahead and work the scene, you know, yes. Once it's there, because it doesn't happen that often, you know, this... a huge amount of work goes into just wandering and going down alleyways and just seeing where these moments might occur, I suppose.
No, I mean, I've always said right from the beginning, the most important thing for a photographer is good shoes. And I learnt that from, I worked just for Bruce Davidson, who's a wonderful, wonderful American photographer. Way back in the early 60s, to me, he was the best photographer. And I managed to get the chance of working with him as a kind of assistant. And I mean, the first thing I learned was that he was 1 year older than I was. When I met him, I couldn't believe it. Here it was, I was buggering about for the local newspaper, you know, and this was the most famous photographer in the world. And he's roughly the same age. And so my first question was, what in the hell am I not doing, you know, that he is so great. But one of the things I discovered from him was that we used to get up at 5:30 every morning and we'd go out to shoot, and I'd say, and he'd say, well, I want to see what England, we were in England at that time, what England looks like at 5:30 in the morning with no people around. And then we were still working at 11:30 at night, because he would be saying, I want to see what life is like in the pubs and things. So I learnt very early that you had very sore feet if you had bad shoes, you know. So almost the first thing I ever wrote was that the most important thing in photography, if you're going to be a serious photographer, is good shoes, you know. And I believe that. You know, photography is hard work if you're doing this sort of photography. It's different if you're working in a studio, you have a time base, etc. But for me, you know, I've got to the age now where when I wake up in the morning, I think, boy, I'm still here. That's great. That's a big bonus, you know. But the next bonus is that I'm here in a new world. Every day is new. and different. So I want to get out into it and see what's there. You know, the most important thing to me in photography is curiosity. You know, that's the first thing I talk to with young students. You know, if you don't have curiosity, and you don't have tenacity to work hard, forget it. Go and do something else. You know, because you're not going to make it. You know, you have to have curiosity, you have to have tenacity, you have to have the ability to research and to clarify things. You know, what are the most important elements all the time? Because life is so complicated around us, you know. So you have to pick out the things that are, you know, and as I was saying, and the way we do that, I think, changes. You know, so I don't shoot pictures like that, and most of the pictures that I see nowadays are not pictures that I could possibly take, and one of the reasons why I'm sort of slowly pulling out is because of that. You know, I don't have much to say about photography now because it's not the way I do it. You know.
I should say, if you don't mind me saying so, David, an experience of David, which I think is worth sharing. Actually, he's been working on a very interesting. I hope you don't mind me saying an interesting landscape project where you're sort of going back to things that you'd photographed some time before, and one or two of us have spent a bit of time with David as he's been doing that, and this thing about energy and tenacity, right? So David says we're going up to, was it Heolsan, or you know, which is this Roman road at just in the Brecon Beacons, and so we get there, and then he goes running off up this path with his cameras. I've got to go, hang on a minute. You know, that we get, you know, and it is that energy that you have to have because you really want to do it. But what really fascinates me about spending time with David when he's got a camera with him is that he'll fill your boot full of stuff in terms of, you know, if you're going out for a shoot, but actually the camera only takes that much space. It's his research. It's all the information, and that's in a way the most important thing. You've got to have a camera, I know, but it is about being quite clear about what you want to achieve. Dan, if I can just ask you again this question, which part of what we're talking about, or should be talking about today, is the idea of then and now, and I think David's just sort of made reference to the way that photography, when people approach photography, has changed. David has said that he, you know, whatever happens in front of him, he doesn't really kind of influence it. It's something that happens and he photographs it. Do you find that, you know, with the work that you were doing, that sometimes you are expecting or promoting some sort of reaction from the people you're photographing?
I suppose a lot of the time I'm hoping there's a reaction. A lot of the time that kind of magic doesn't necessarily happen, you know, but saying that, the more you're out there, the more likely it is to happen. You know, it's all about putting the work in and being out there in the world and just looking for the pictures that you want to take, and they're not necessarily where you think they will be a lot of the time, and just keeping the momentum going. We spoke earlier about the excitement of jumping in the car, not really knowing where you're going, and wondering what you're going to come back with at the end of the day. And that I think that kind of drives you when you go out into the world. And you know, you will have some sort of preconceived ideas of what you want, but looking for them is not as easy as it seems a lot of the time.
I suppose the thing I'm always interested in. Some of you may notice I never photograph people, so I can talk about this in a kind of non-committal way. But when you look at David's photographs, you not all, like there's one there in Big Pit, right? So everybody there is in a photography studio having their photograph taken by David, which is kind of weird picture. But in the main, people are not necessarily sort of reacting directly with the camera. But there seems to be a lot of photography now where, and you see a lot of this where there's sort of portraits and people are quite sort of passive aggressive. Kind of look, it's sort of either
smile.
Yeah, it is that. It's not about life being lived and sort of somehow capturing that in the camera. It's about a reaction to a camera. I'm just wondering, would you agree with that, or?
Yeah, I suppose when I used to shoot a similar type of stuff, black and white, you would kind of look for the more candid moments, but sometimes you can't help be taken along with the trends. I know it's a horrible thing to say, and there is a more kind of rigidness to photography these days, where less candid shots, more posed portraits, and that type of thing, if that's what you mean. I suppose it almost feeds the discussion. Is the candid photography on its way out in a way? Street photography has been criticised in the press, in the last few years for, privacy kind of things and being intrusive. And so I don't know if maybe it is the next, just a natural transition, if you like.
Yeah, I don't think David you've never followed any trends, have you? I think you've always done, you just do what you want to do. But there is an interesting point here as well, and I think Dan's sort of hitting that to something here. If you look at a lot of David's pictures, okay, if you're looking at people who are adults and so on, okay, they're probably aware initially that David would be there with the camera, but because he's there and he's quite clearly photographing, people very quickly don't worry about it. They just let photographers get on with it. There's lots of children in your pictures, David. I mean, would you, now I think people are far more nervous, aren't they, when they see particularly a bloke, but it doesn't have to be just a bloke, but with a camera. I mean, have you come up against any problems in more recent times in terms of photographing younger people?
No. Why? Maybe I photograph less children now. I mean, I don't do it consciously, but there's no doubt that there is a kind of vague atmosphere about shooting kids. So, but if I really feel keen about something, I photograph anything that's there. And I've never had a problem with it, ever. I think I'm very unobtrusive. I don't think I look as though I'm a sort of person trying to be flamboyant about anything. I'm a great believer, if you go to where there's a group activity, you should be the person that nobody remembers. That's part of the trick. I'm very on top of my technical side, so I never have to think about. To me, a camera is simply an extension. So if I have my camera here, I mean, I've used just two lenses all my life. For those that know about it, a 28 and a 50 lens. So if I look here, I know exactly what a 50mm framing would do. I know exactly what a 28mm framing. So I know where to stand before the camera even gets up to my eye. It's a bit like you don't expect Barenboim or or Ashkenazi playing a piano to be looking at the notes. You know, he just plays. And so if you get into that sort of habit of not really thinking about it at all you're thinking about is about the subject matter, you know. Does this make a picture? I have, I think, a very instinctive sense of design, so I never find it a problem as to where to stand. You know, if I'm shooting a picture here, I would move 6 inches this way because I can see the gentleman there would be cut off by the head of this person. That's an instinctive process that I have. So then after that, what I'm looking for all the time is gestures. You know, the difference between if I do that to you, it's very different from if I do that to you. And that's what I'm looking for all the time, is those little subtle things. But no, I just photograph what I want to photograph. Now, if that changes because I've read things in the newspaper and it's gone into my subconscious, that's what life is about. You know, we change our minds about things. So maybe I subtly photograph different subject matter. I'm not conscious of it. Not conscious of it at all. I mean, I would not, for example, if I went past a school playground, stand there photographing the kids. But if I wanted to, I would, you know, go in and see the headmaster and say, do you mind if I photograph the kids? And then it would be probably okay, you know, or probably not okay. I wouldn't worry me because I'd go because round the corner there's going to be another picture somewhere, you know.